Okay, so this week we'll be discussing the principles of argument. So no, we're not talking about the kind of argument you have when you spend too much time with your family over the holidays. Ha ha ha. Okay, that wasn't that funny, but it makes the point. So we're not talking about the kind of argument that we think of commonly when we use the word. An argument, in the sense in which we'll be using it in this class, is a reason or set of reasons given with the aim of persuading others that an action or idea is right or wrong. So the thing with argument in this sense is that based on that classification, based on that definition, much of what we say in our everyday lives is this kind of argument. So for example, if you came home and told your significant other, oh, I had a terrible day today, I had a flat tire on the way to work, so I was late, and then I went for lunch and I got food poisoning, that in and of itself is an argument. So you're trying to persuade your significant other or family member or whoever that you had a terrible day, and you're giving reasons, a reason or set of reasons, with the aim of persuading them of that. So you had a terrible day, and here are the reasons why you should believe that I had a terrible day. So that's the kind of argument that we're talking about. So reasons given with the aim of persuading. So in this class, we'll be making use of argument strategies to write persuasive essays. So your next essay assignment, the rhetorical analysis, will be the first time that we deal with argument strategies. And then your final essay assignment will actually be your own argument essay. So rhetoric is the art of constructing an effective spoken or written argument, such as the kind of argument you'd make in a persuasive essay. So rhetoric, that's Greek, and it is a Greek word for the art of argument. Now, there are many different ways that you can approach making an argument, and we classify these in three broad categories. We call these the rhetorical appeals, and those three are, you've possibly heard these terms before, pathos, ethos, and logos. So what are those? We'll take them one at a time. So let's talk first about pathos. So the use of pathos as a strategy in an argument serves to appeal to the audience's emotions and feelings. So when you think about pathos, think about emotions. So an argument that's using this strategy is attempting to make the reader feel a certain way. So an argument always wants you to do something or to believe something, but an argument that's using the strategy of pathos is trying to get you to act or to believe a certain way based on your feelings about something. So whether those feelings are sympathy, gratitude, anger, outrage, fear, excitement, etc. All of these might be classified under pathos. So the focus of pathos is the heart of the audience. So maybe you're thinking, how am I going to remember that pathos has anything to do with emotions? Well, if you think of the word sympathy, so sympathy has that root word in it, pathy or pathos. Sym meaning with, as in symbiotic, for example. So sympathy literally means feeling with someone or something. So, and we know that sympathy involves emotions, so that hopefully will help you to remember that pathos has to do with emotions. So how are emotional appeals developed in an argument? Well, pathos can be developed through the use of what we call meaningful language, an emotional tone, emotion-evoking examples, and emotional anecdotes. An anecdote is just another word for a story. So pathos is also developed through appeals to memories and fears, as well as repetition. Repetition, you'd be surprised the effect that repeating something can have on the emotions. And also even figurative language can be a form of pathos. So just to expound a bit on those basic terms, meaningful language includes words and phrases with emotional connotations. So something with a connotation has a meaning aside from its denotative meaning or its dictionary meaning. So connotations are ideas associated with a word that go beyond its actual meaning. So a word with an emotional connotation would be a word that normally makes you feel a certain way. So emotional tone is basically established by the use of words like this, words with emotional connotations. Emotion-evoking examples serve to personalize an issue. So if you can cite an example of something, then it really drives home the point and brings a personal touch to an issue. And then emotional anecdotes are stories that are told with the purpose of making the audience feel a certain way. So let's talk a little bit more about connotations in case you're not familiar with the idea of a word having connotations. So as I just mentioned, a word's denotative meaning is the meaning that you'd find if you actually were to look it up in the dictionary. But words have connotations that go beyond that and include ideas associated with the word and also the everyday social use of the word. So what kinds of connotations can a word have? Well, it can have positive connotations or negative connotations, or it can have neutral connotations or really none at all. So it should be noted that a word's connotations do depend greatly on the context in which it's being used, and sometimes also on personal associations. So in most cases, you can say for a fact that certain words have positive connotations and certain ones have negative connotations. But sometimes it does also depend on a person's own associations with that word and also context in which it's being used. So for example, describing a curious person, you could say that they are inquisitive, which is a positive way to describe someone. It's a word with positive connotations. Or you could say that they're nosy. When we say someone is nosy, we usually mean that in a negative way. So the word nosy has negative connotations. Here's another example. You could describe the same room as being cozy. The word cozy has very positive connotations. Or you could say that it's cramped. Cramped always has negative connotations. You don't say something is cramped and mean it in a nice way. You could describe a long lecture. I don't think any of mine qualify as long lectures so far. I don't think we've had any over 40 minutes. But you could describe a long lecture as being thorough, which is positive, or you could say it was exhaustive, which is negative. So you probably get the idea here, that you can describe the same thing with different words and elicit different emotions. Okay, so let's look at an example of pathos in action. So as you look at this ad and just kind of look over it for a few seconds, ask yourself, how is this ad working on my emotions? Okay, so this is a kind of depressing looking ad, and unfortunately it's a little bit blurry. I apologize for that. So it's got a picture of a little puppy, specifically I think a pit bull puppy, and then it asks the question, does she look like a fighter? Countless puppies are forced into dogfighting each year. Help end this barbaric cruelty. Donate today. Okay, so first of all, what does this ad want you to do? If you said it wants you to donate today to end dogfighting, you are correct. So this is an argument that is being made. It wants you to do something. Do you see any examples here of words that have connotative or connotations to them? Specifically negative connotations to them. Look through this ad and see if you can find words with negative connotations. If you said barbaric and cruelty, you were correct. I don't think I've ever heard the word barbaric or cruel used in a positive way. So these words have negative connotations. They are creating an emotional tone. Also the fact that it's not just puppies, but countless puppies. And the fact, too, that it's not dogs. It's the dogs that are actually being fought in the dogfighting. But the fact that it used the word puppies. Puppies has a connotation as well. When we think about a puppy, we think about something small and cute and innocent. And then the word forced has definite negative connotations as well. Can you find an example of an emotional example? Personalizing the issue. If you said the fact that we're talking about a specific puppy here, where it asks the question, does she look like a fighter, then you are correct. So this ad, in addition to using words with emotional connotations, negative connotations specifically, is also personalizing the issue by showing you a puppy, a specific puppy, a female puppy at that, and asking, does she look like a fighter? So we have a definite emotional example here. We have an emotional tone being created by connotative words with decidedly negative emotions attached to them. So this ad is doing its job, I think, very well. It's making you horrified at the fact that anyone would support dogfighting, and it's persuading you to do your part to end it. So that was a nice example of pathos, I thought. So let's move on then to ethos. So the use of ethos in an argument describes a speaker's attempt to convince an audience of his or her character or credibility. So when you think ethos, think about think about character, credibility, trustworthiness, etc. So an argument that successfully uses ethos persuades the audience to believe a certain way because they trust the speaker. So unlike pathos that's focused on the audience and getting them to feel a certain way, ethos is actually focused on the arguer themselves, on the speaker, and trying to make them someone trustworthy, someone who's an authority figure, someone who has credibility. So that's what I just said. The focus of an appeal to ethos is on the authority of the speaker rather than the audience. So that's a major difference between the two. So how are ethical appeals developed within an argument? Well, ethos can be developed through the use of language that's appropriate to the topic. So perhaps choosing the proper level of vocabulary makes you sound like an authority figure or someone who knows what they're talking about. Sounding fair and reasonable is important too. Someone fair and reasonable is usually credible, usually trustworthy, and that's the point of ethos. Introducing the speaker's expertise as well makes them an authority figure, and then too by using correct grammar and syntax. So obviously not using correct grammar and syntax takes away from your credibility, and that's what ethos is all about. So to expound a little bit more on these terms, using language appropriate to the topic basically convinces the audience that you know what you're talking about. If you can use that language that's appropriate to a specific topic that you're arguing about, you show your audience that you're informed. You know what you're talking about. So sounding fair, unbiased, and reasonable, the point of that is to make yourself seem trustworthy because you aren't emotionally involved. So ethos doesn't really involve emotions. In fact, it tries to distance itself in a way from emotions. Introducing expertise establishes you as an authority on the issue at hand. And then, once again, correct grammar and syntax demonstrate that you're educated, you can speak intelligently about that specific topic, or just in general. So, for example, let's look at another ad and see if we can see evidences of ethos in action. So take a few seconds to look at this print ad, and we'll talk about it. Okay, so this is an ad for Sensodyne or Sensodyne toothpaste, or however you're supposed to say that. And the first thing that you might notice is the person recommending this to you is a woman here dressed very professionally, dressed in a white lab coat. Her name is Dr. Alexandra Smith. She's a dentist from Chicago. So it's not just anyone telling you that they recommend Sensodyne. It is a dentist. So she looks like she's got great teeth. She looks very professional, and she tells you that you should use this toothpaste. So she's using her expertise here to convince you. Then too, the wording is using specific language, so language appropriate to the topic. Expert sensitivity relief. That's the kind of thing that a dentist would say. Plus the benefits of daily toothpaste, extra whitening. Let's see, if you look at the actual box, it says toothpaste for sensitive teeth and cavity prevention. So it's sounding very formal. It's sounding like it knows what it's talking about. But I would say that the part of this ad that is most directly using ethos as an argument strategy is the fact that it's being recommended by a dentist. So her authority, her credibility, and her expertise are what makes this an example of ethos. Okay, so finally, let's talk about Logos. The use of logos in an argument has the goal of convincing the audience by means of logic and reason. So now we've left behind your own personal expertise and authority, we've left behind the emotions of the audience, and we're focusing purely on logic and reason. So a logical appeal is focusing on the mind of the audience. So how are logical appeals developed? Well, logical appeals, as you might guess, are developed by citing facts. So when you see inclusion of data, case studies, references to statistics, etc., also historical and literal analogies. So this argument is true because it's like this other thing. And also by constructing logical arguments, specifically inductive and deductive reasoning. We'll talk about those two in just a second. So facts, they serve to provide concrete evidence to support logical claims, and that's important. Analogies help the audience to think a certain way about an issue based on how they already think about a related issue. So this kind of reasoning relies on the whole, if A is true and B can be proven to be like A, then B is true as well. So analogies are a popular form of logical appeal. Then we have inductive and deductive reasoning. So inductive reasoning uses specific examples to state a general rule. So here's an example. The people I know who have healthy teeth all brush and floss every day. So that's a specific example. It's people that I personally know. It's a small scale example. But notice how it's being used to make a general universal statement. Therefore, brushing and flossing your teeth every day will give you healthy teeth. So that's a nice example, just a basic example of how inductive reasoning works. And then deductive reasoning uses general rules to make specific examples. So the very opposite is true with deductive reasoning. It works in the opposite direction. So you start out general and apply that general rule to specific examples or cases. So for example, the overall universal truth that's being stated here is that cats are weird, and that's quite true. Then you say Jeremy has a cat, so that's a specific cat. And then notice the conclusion there, it makes the connection. So based on that universal truth and based on the fact that Jeremy has a cat and that cat is a cat, we can state as a conclusion that Jeremy's cat is weird. So these are just two common forms of logical argument, inductive and deductive reasoning. One works from specific examples to make general rules, and one works in the opposite direction. So here's a nice example of logos in action. So it's kind of a basic example, I'm sure you'll agree. But this is actually a Verizon ad. Perhaps you've seen it before. It's a Verizon print ad. And what are they trying to convey with this ad? So take a second to think about that. Okay, so basically what they're trying to argue is that Verizon Wireless has the best coverage. And how are they trying to convince you of that? Are they using emotion? I would say not. Are they using an appeal to their own authority? I would say not. What they're actually using here is cold, hard data. So they have maps, and they've put little dots on those maps to indicate all the Verizon towers and how they have so many more towers than AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile. So they want you to use their coverage or go with Verizon instead of these other providers based on logic, on the fact that your brain will say, hey, Verizon seems like a better deal because it has so many more towers and so much more coverage. So this is pure data, pure fact. So a nice example of logos. Ooh, whoops, something wrong with the slide, but let me just click all the way through it. Okay. So just slightly more on the subject of inductive versus deductive arguments, because they can be quite confusing for students sometimes. Probably not you guys, because you seem like a really smart bunch. But just once again, for repetition's sake, inductive reasoning, we're talking about moving from specific observations to general conclusions. And this inductive reasoning is actually also known as the scientific method. And it's quite easy to see why it would be called that, because that is how science works. That's how experiments work. That's how we find out things in science and in the study of the Earth and of the known universe. So we make specific observations, perhaps in an experiment, and based on those specific small scale findings, we make broad statements about life and about the earth and things like that. So another couple examples of inductive reasoning. I just tasted a lemon for the first time and it was sour. So that's one lemon, specific lemon that you tasted. Therefore, I assume that all lemons are sour. So that would be an experiment. So if someone gave you a fruit for the first time and you tried it and it tasted a certain way, you could gather, using this form of reasoning, that that's what all fruits like that taste like. So another cat example, because everything is cats to me. So my cat, Dusty, has whiskers. That is a specific observation. So based on that specific observation, I can say generally that all cats have whiskers. So that's an example of the scientific method in action. So arguments based on inductive reasoning are effective as long as the audience agrees that the evidence is sufficient to make your inductive leap. So when you go about actually looking at some of the ads that you'll be looking at for your rhetorical analysis, perhaps you'll find examples of an ad that's asking you to make an inductive leap. So is it presenting evidence, examples, specific examples, and asking you to arrive at a conclusion, at a broader conclusion? If so, you might be looking at an example of inductive reasoning. Okay, so deductive reasoning, as we mentioned earlier, works in the exact opposite way. So it begins with general truths and it applies them to specific instances. And the way that deductive reasoning works is by means of a three-step process that we call a syllogism. So I have an example here for you of a syllogism so that you can see the parts laid out. So there are three parts of a syllogism that you will always be able to pick out. You have your major premise, which would be the general or the universal truth that you start with. You have your minor premise, which would be the specific example that you're trying to apply the general truth to. And then you have your conclusion, which is where you apply that truth to the specific example and come up with some kind of conclusion. Okay, so my example here, my major premise or my general truth is that all insects have 6 legs, and that is true. If a bug does not have 6 legs, then it is not an insect. So my minor premise or my specific example is, let's say I'm looking at a bug on my wall, and I say the bug on my wall has 8 legs. So based on my general knowledge of the fact that insects have 6 legs, and based on my specific finding of a bug that has 8 legs, what conclusion can I come to? Well, I can apply the one to the other and come to the conclusion that the bug on the wall is not an insect. And that is correct. So the bug on the wall might be something else. Maybe it's an arachnid. It could be like a spider, which is an arachnid. But it is definitely not an insect. So that is how a syllogism works. That's how deductive reasoning works. So perhaps too, when you look at your ads for your rhetorical analysis essay assignment, you'll be able to see some examples of an ad that is making use of deductive reasoning. Some other forms of argument strategy might kind of jump out at you in the ads when you start looking at them. But deductive and inductive reasoning will take a little bit of thinking. So you'll have to make the connection. It's not going to tell you we're using deductive reasoning here or we're using inductive reasoning. But if you can find an example of that, I will be particularly impressed. So your turn, yay! Can you write your own example of a syllogism, labeling its 3 parts? So try that, if you will. It's not graded, obviously. I won't actually know if you did or not. But the thing to remember with a syllogism is start with a general statement of truth. Then apply that same idea to a specific instance in which that truth is true. So maybe you could start with one of these general truths. Vegetables are good for you. Dogs are pack animals. Cardio exercise is good for the heart. You can probably see where I'm going with some of these. So if, let's say for example, if vegetables are good for you and broccoli is a vegetable, then broccoli is good for you. So vegetables are good for you would be my major premise. Broccoli is a vegetable would be my minor premise, and my conclusion would be based on those 2 things, broccoli is good for you. So maybe let's take that last one as an example. Cardio exercise is good for your heart. Okay, that's a universal truth. So what if I say specifically that running is a form of cardio exercise, which it is? That could be my minor premise. So what conclusion could I draw based on those two? Well, if cardio is good for the heart and running is cardio, then running is good for the heart. Very good. So hopefully you get the idea. Hopefully this argument lecture was pretty straightforward. I know pathos and ethos are usually the two easier for students, and logos takes a little bit more thinking. But I have full faith that you'll be able to impress me on your rhetorical analysis essay and point out to me all the interesting types of persuasion that these ads that I give you are attempting. So thanks for watching.